Welcome everyone to Emergency Preparedness or Not. We have a wise lineup of storytellers here with us today with 150 collective years of experience as burners. I am Epiphany from the Camp Support Team. We also have Gary Gibson from VW Buscamp, which has been placed for 25 years. Unmute and say hi, Gary, if you can. From the Costco Soulmate Trading Outlet with 50 campers, we have Molly McButter.
Hi, everyone.
Dave X is with us from the Burning Man Fire Art Safety Team.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
Mom is with us from DPW Restoration and Barbie Death Village, which has been placed since 1999.
Thank you for having me here. Hi.
From Orphan Endorphin, we have Captain Ron, which they've been placed since 2012. Consists of 3 camps, from 20 to 160 campers each. Hi, Ron.
Yo!
Fox, who is also chat moderating today, is from Whiskey and Dust. They've been placed since 2009 and have between 60 and 100 campers.
Hello.
From Primal Oasis inside the Alternative Energy Zone, we have Vesper. There are between 7 and 12 campers in their camp.
Hi, everyone.
From Burners Without Borders, we have Chappie. They're an organization whose goal is to unlock the creativity of local communities to solve problems that bring about meaningful change.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
And from Religious AF, we have Puppy on the backstage tech. They have between 20 and 25 campers, established in 2018, offering decommodified and non-judgy Christian spiritual practice and hospitality. Puppy, Vesper, and Fox are also Camp Support Team members with me. We have a volunteer form link for you, and all of the links from the show will be on one document that we will share at the end, so you don't have to scramble around trying to catch them all. All right, so we will be splitting this session up into a few sections. First, I'm going to briefly go over what the red folder is and how to find things inside it. Then we have a section called Hindsight is 2020, and this will be stories about facing emergencies from our own burning experience. Finally, we have a section on our best tips and tricks and advice for you. And toward the end of our time, we'll be sharing that document I talked about. Also, please add your own stories, comments, and questions in the chat, and we will bring them up to our speakers at the end. All right, so Puppy is going to share his screen and click around while I talk a little bit about the red folder. So the red folder is accessed by a single link. It's a dynamic collection of resources I curate for camp organizers to use in emergency planning. It can also be used to create a physical red folder of resources to have in hand in the middle of a crisis. It's also something that I'm trying to keep updated, and I'm very open to any suggestions or materials that you have to add. So send those to me, epiphany@burningman.org. And if you click on the link for the red folder, it takes you to a drive folder. It contains a checklist of the entire folder's contents as a place to start and 2 main sections. The preparation resources folder has a variety of information and how-to resources to use prior to the burn. It has materials that you may want to organize separately from your red folder, such as a step-by-step conflict resolution resource for use by campers. And new this year is a how-to bucket toilet resource. The Prep Resources folder also contains a document, the resources and links document, with links to the red folder workshop video, We'll also include the link to this video as well when we get it created. And all the links that ESD shared in the plenary and other information that may be helpful to review, like where you can get a CPR card, and new this year, a reference to one option for med flight insurance, as well as Captain Ron's Red Box resource. Going back out now to the main page. The other drive folder has the pages to print and create your own red folder with just the info you might need in the moment to handle an emergency in camp, like ESD's first aid booklet. There is also a camper medical release of information form that you heard Kate talk about earlier in the plenary. You can copy that to collect from your campers, and a how-to step-by-step guide for initiating an emergency response in Black Rock City, including a section that you can tear off and send out with your runner. You cannot just call 911. There are special ways to do this that won't work. So make sure you do your research and understand the steps involved. All right, so now we want to hear from you. We have a poll. How far in advance do you start your emergency planning for the burn? Mom, while folks are filling in the poll, you want to tell us what that's like for your camp?
It's a year-round thing, actually. From the moment we leave, we start planning for the next year. It's actually a really good option to begin right away with a little bit of discussing and what's happened that year as a great way to begin what we're going to do for the new year. So planning for us is all the time.
Yeah.
I would guess people are very similar. I see Dave's already said right now. So he's
Love
right.
it, Aubrey.
Right now and always.
Vesper, what about you guys?
Yeah, definitely agree about the talk about things right after the burn. Hindsight is really fresh when it's just after something has happened. And kind of to add a layer to that, I think it also depends on what is needed. And recency is really important. So I also like to send the most important stuff right before I leave to people.
Fox, what about your camp?
Well, we always do like a postmortem after the burn with where we're reviewing everything, and we have an anonymous survey. So if somebody feels like that they can't talk about something with the group, they have different ways of doing that. And then our planning for the burn starts in January. So I feel like I'm always thinking about it.
Ron, is your camp any different?
We start at the end of the burn. You have to consider what supplies you've used in your first aid kit or your emergency supplies.
And Molly, how about your camp?
Yeah, pretty similar in that we have an immediate postmortem where we go through everything from what's missing and what did, what worked this last time. Like, for example, one of our campers this year bought dust covers for the electrical. They're actually supposed to be waterproof covers for the electrical. And people were laughing at him because they were like, we won't need that. And then it turned out that was a very good $3 purchase, right? And so we're like, we need more of those, and we will have those on hand forever now in our camp area.
Nice. I think our poll got a little messed up. So I think after hearing from everyone, it sounds like we should be planning all the time, and definitely right after the first after we leave Playa, right? So why are we doing emergency planning? I want to ask my speakers, what are some emergencies you have faced at Burning Man? So we're going to start a lineup. of this one time at Burning Man. And I'll start. I met a burner in Deep Playa one hot afternoon who asked me where the water stands were. Dave.
Well, I was walking around once with the insurance agent who handles the insurance for Burning Man, and he wanted to know all about the fire and the fireworks and the burning of the structures. And you would have assumed that that would have been a big deal for him. But after spending no more than maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes hearing my story, he said, well, this fire isn't really of a concern. It sounds like you've got this under control. What I'm really worried about are these trip and fall incidents. And he's talking about stakes and cords going across your camp and electrical things. So I just want to remind folks that while sometimes we focus on the glamorous safety stuff and the obscure incidents that may never happen, it's the mundane trip and fall incidents which need constant attention to sweep through your camp and look for these kind of things on a daily basis. It's like looking for moop, but a safety moop.
That's a good point. Vesper.
We camp in our camp with both well-aged burners and very fresh burners. And of the people kind of in the middle of those two groups, we've had both a broken arm and a broken leg, and 2 airlifts to Reno.
Cool. Fox.
Well, one time we had a tornado come through and destroy our main shade structure during Tuesday of the build week.
Mom.
So last year we had somebody who was trying to access another camp behind us with a 40-foot motorhome that they did not know how to drive, and decided to cut corners and ran over a tent that a camper was sleeping in. And so, we had to deal with that, but it kind of is an example of what you don't expect. I mean, Dave X said, yes, you've got the regular stuff, but it's the stuff that you don't expect to be prepared for that I would consider a real emergency. Like having a truck drive over somebody's tent when you're not expecting it.
Thank you. Gary.
Crime. That's an unexpected thing that is very difficult to plan for, especially when the crime is from outside your camp. And we had a camp member we have a lot of people in our camp who are pretty experienced at traveling. We're kind of a van life, Volkswagen camper life project. And a lot of women camp with us coming out solo. I think Leanne did, Epiphany did that once. But anyways, one of our camp members woke up naked in her bed and she had no memory of what happened to her. And she said she never sleeps naked in her bed at Burning Man. So we got the Rangers out, we talked to her and tried to figure out what she wanted to do. And one of the first things you would think, well, let's talk to the Leos and they could investigate this thing. And she felt that there wasn't any evidence there to prove what happened. And she was just so horrified by the whole experience that she just wanted to go home. And I didn't know what to say to her. I was going to support her for whatever she did. But anyways, crime is one of the unexpected things. It's very hard to plan for.
Yeah. There's a lot of love in the city, and it's easy to project that crime doesn't happen there, but it does. I had my bike stolen one year. All right, so we're going to dive into the details with some meteor stories. Fox and Vesper, you both talked about or have had someone airlifted off of Playa. Tell us some more about what that was like.
That's where you can go first.
Sure. So both of the times that we had to have someone airlifted off of the Playa, it actually took a while to convince them to go to the medical services in the first place. For one, in one instance, someone had been really sick and was kind of brushing it off in the spirit of, I really want to continue to do Burning Man. But it was starting to get to a place where they really needed, we thought that they really needed medical attention. PSA, like if anything happens with your head or your heart or your chest or your breathing, like please get medical attention. Just so that you know that you're getting looked at. And in one of the other incident, someone had a really serious bicycle accident, and was obviously very significantly injured, but also needed quite a bit of convincing to go to get medical attention for that. And I understand that there's definitely a desire to be at Burning Man and stay at Burning Man and have fun. But particularly when someone is injured or they might be sick, Burning Man is not necessarily worth dying over. We could have a debate about that in another forum. Die doing what you love, I guess. But it really is more important to take care of yourself and to take care of each other. So after quite a bit of negotiation, cajoling, coercion, we convinced each of our campmates to go seek medical attention, and they ended up having to get airlifted. Both of them were eventually able to return to the playa after they were treated in Reno for a while. And subsequently, when we brought, I brought my parents one of the later years after these incidences, and I really wanted to make sure that they had a safe burn. So we took steps to, just in case something happened, to make sure that we were prepared for that. Fox, what about you?
We had one camp member who passed out, and we have a lot of medical people in our camp. So they were able to attend to him and then take him to Maine Medical, where he was airlifted out to Reno. It turns out that he just had an irregular heart rhythm and was able to return a couple of days later. But this is why we have emergency contact information and like a folder with medical information that they're willing to share that's in a private folder in case something like this happens. And the story coming back was bigger and brighter than their story going out, that's for sure.
Thank you both. Dave, you've had a unique experience with the camp that I've never seen before, a concept that I think wasn't repeated for a reason. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, and I heard actually, strange enough, Marion mentioned it in the plenary this morning, the same camp. But sometimes things you'll see which seem like egregious safety violations or whatever are actually a lifestyle choice. And you have to really kind of think hard whether you need to interact with something that's a lifestyle choice rather than an actual emergency. And so the story started like this, though, and I think this was 96, and I heard Marion mention it again. There was a camp on the playa called the Aesthetic Meat Foundation, and you may want to Google it, but if you're sensitive, you may not want to Google it. But in any case, as the name implied, this camp used to ring their entire camp with meat, and it would be like guts and intestines and skulls and eyeballs and all the waste that they could get from the butcher or the slaughter yard or whatever, bones and decomposing meat. Now, this was kind of visually funny for maybe one day, but after a day out in the hot sun, it was not so funny anymore. And the other thing that these folks were into besides meat as decoration was piercing and suspension. So as you'd walk by, you'd see bloody people hanging from hooks in a ring of rotten meat. And while I may have once had some, intentions to play around with that kind of piercing and suspension, in a ring of rotten meat seemed like a terrible place to do this. So if you can imagine, I tried to, like Marion, avoid this camp as much as possible. One night I heard a band going on there, and I thought I'm going to go take a look. And me and my friend Charlie go over. And as soon as we got up to where the band was playing, this guy fired up a pump and sprayed the whole audience with congealed pig's blood, which again may have been funny in some situations and some lifestyles. But as I'd come to Burning Man with a head full of little tiny braids that my girlfriend at the time had put in, and the pig's blood got right into those little braids, and this is in the day of solar showers, it was not as funny and fun as you might have assumed. Now, of course, you want to go over and like say, you guys get the hell out of Burning Man, but it was more of a lifestyle choice. And I got to say, those folks self-selected out real quick. And I just did a little Google to make sure that they still live. And yes, they still live. but even amongst burners, the camp of meat was a little bit too much. So things that are safety violations, but more of a lifestyle choice, tend to correct themselves, is the motto of my talk here.
Is being covered in blood a safety issue when it comes to getting hypothermia?
Yeah, I mean, it is. You wouldn't want to go wandering the desert covered in nothing but blood. I mean, that seems like a poor Burning Man costume.
All right. So
But yeah, I mean, it was very graphic, and wow, I didn't smell so good for a lot of days until I got that fully out of my hair.
gross. All right, we have Molly. What Molly
Yeah.
what would you like to tell us about
Yeah,
Molly?
we so at Costco, we have a fair number of rangers and other folks who camp with us. So we do, I think that is one of the I think one of the bonus, things about having those folks. They kind of know how to deal with some of these situations. But this year, this last year with the rain, we had several campers whose tents completely flooded, and who had been spending the day walking around barefoot, and then decided to get intoxicated, and were in no state to be choosing to sleep in their tent or anywhere near there, right? Like they really couldn't make a thoughtful decision about where they were going to lie down for the night. And so camp management, we just kind of came together and said, let's just check on everybody and make sure. And there was one camper in particular who didn't have to get convinced to go on a flight, but did have to get convinced to sleep somewhere other than their very wet sleeping bag. And I think we were all very relieved when the couple of folks got settled in the container in a safe spot, and with dry sleeping bags from one of the trailers. But it was scary, right? Because like we hadn't necessarily expected this, but I think for us the key was being alert to kind of unsafe situations a little bit. Like you do want people to be radically self-reliant, but if you know that they're intoxicated, I think it's helpful to just have your alert up a little bit more so that, they're not using the fire or sleeping in water or, making some decisions like that. So, I think we were lucky that we were able to keep an eye on things, but it was a little bit scary this year for sure.
Yeah, so many things about Burning Man are trying to kill you, and there are extra opportunities to make bad decisions. Gary, you wanted to tell us some about conflict management. What's your story?
Oh, with conflict? I guess I have the one story where we had one of our campmates was from Scotland, and she told these great stories about Burning Man. So 5 of her girlfriends from Scotland showed up, and we were just this wonderful camp that added Scotch influence. But anyways, one of her friends came solo in this weird old Canadian RV, and her boyfriend from Scotland, showed up and wouldn't leave her alone. And we told him that, it's like you have to go. And he was like, just too much. And so I talked to rangers. The ranger I talked to is a really good friend. And he looked at it and he says, well, I can call the law enforcement, the Leos, and have them come. And I said, yeah, do it. Do it, Trevor. I need this over with. And Trevor said, well, I don't want to come to your camp and have one of your campmates arrested. And I said, he's not a campmate. He's making problems. The woman he's harassing wants him gone. So law enforcement, sheriff's department people came, and they talked to him, and they said, you have to leave. And he was all worked up and resistant. And they said, well, will you leave? And he said no. So they arrested him. And it was kind of sad, but I really think that was the only thing that was going to happen, his state of mind and stuff. And when I got home, I actually had an email in my box that's from his mother in Scotland, wondering where he was. And it was sad, but sometimes, again, people will come into your camp and and you have to deal with it the best you can, and often dealing with the Leos is the way to go.
It would be helpful to have some conflict management experience if you're running a camp. The stranger is not always safe. The stranger might be dangerous. What's your experience with that, Mom?
Very funny. Conflict management, I think, is extremely important in my mundane world. I actually do ombudsman and mediation work. So having that as a tool in my toolbox is very useful. And it would have helped a lot if I would have been around during probably the most infamous thing that ever happened to Barbie, which once again builds on that external forces coming in. In 2019, many of you are aware of it, we had a gentleman and two ladies come in to Barbie and begin yelling and screaming. They began to destroy the art. They were pulling up actual Barbies and throwing them all over the place and screaming and yelling. Quite a few people who were in the area that this happened, which was in our maid shade, received injuries, which of course that's an emergency in itself. However, the people who were in charge at the time, I don't think handled it very well. The individual came in, he accused us of being anti-Semitic, accused us of putting up these things and upsetting just him. And so he took his vehicle, which you're not supposed to drive your vehicles during the event, and drove directly to our area, parked right in front of there. And T-Fire, who's actually in our emergency planning, was there during that event. She'll probably make some comments, but the people who handled it just fought fire with fire. And instead of having a direct line, a system in place for conflict management, deciding how these things can work, it was chaos. And the result ended up in not only many people getting hurt, but also things getting destroyed. Not only our art, but someone took a mallet and hit the car of the individual who was initiating all this. And that person too did the incorrect thing. Looking back on this situation, had we utilized the skills that I talked about in the beginning with conflict resolution and sitting down and talking, the individual never would have done the problem, because we could have all said, hey, the people who run Barbie are actually Jewish and not anti-Semitic, and it's actually not what you think it is. It's about a pun. It's about playing on words. This isn't what it's about. Come and sit with us for a moment. It also would have helped in the actual event with the people who escalated it. And so we have put into place things to prevent this, including art guardians, people who sit and will engage people and have these discussions with them about what the art means and how it can be interpreted. And so we've also instituted ways that we react to people and a line of command. Who can we talk to help de-escalate when you've got these things going on instead of escalating them? And now I know that we can handle this because we've had many other external things happen to Barbie, but we're still dealing with stuff like optics, which are very difficult, social media, these things. Had we done this right, I think things could have been very different. And I think it's very important when you emergency plan to have these systems in place, because they work, whether you've got an emergency, an external emergency, or one internally. So that's the story.
Thanks, Mom. I have always been curious what the story was that happened. Yeah, so many good nuggets of wisdom in there. And camp organizers, take a moment to educate your campers about what are okay ways to engage and what are not okay ways to engage with the art as well.
So real quick, the other thing too that I think is exceptionally important is we can't all be in camp all the time. So it's important to know who your support system is. I have a number 2. We also have sub-camp leads. Know the strengths of the people who you have, because they might be even a better resource than yourself, depending on that emergency. So thank you.
Yeah. In the red folder, we have several items that could be great resources to prepare, and also in the moment if you're having conflict in camp. There is also a medical release of information form. I talked about that earlier in our session. Gary, you have a story about missing a camper. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. I, I, immigrated to New Zealand years ago, and I missed a lot of the early 1990s and stuff. I didn't really know about HIPAA because that happened in 96. I wasn't around when that happened. And so anyways, I didn't realize that there were basically you had problems. Well, let me tell you a story. It's one of our camp members who was a cancer survivor and diabetic, and he camped with us many years, and he was a retired university professor, and he was a great camp member. He passed away a couple years ago. But anyways, he one of our other camp members said that I haven't seen him for a while. Where is he? And the friend, the campmate I said, well, just go in there and see if he's. I said, well, I'm afraid. I think he's dead. I'm not going to go into his tent because I think he's dead. And so I said, whatever, I'll go look for him. And there's just nobody there. And so this campmate and I, we rode all around town to various medical places that we thought he could have, medical stations to see if he stopped in there. And they all informed me that, well, no, we can't tell you anything about him. So we had a lost camp member that nobody could legally tell us what had happened to him. And finally, somebody had actually seen him go to this one medical area. And so we said, well, we know he was there. Can you at least tell us where he is now? And he said, well, he went to the main, whatever you call it, the main medical tent. But anyway, I guess my story is it's very frustrating because, it's like, whoa, you can just be disappeared. It's almost like a sci-fi film. All of a sudden you're gone and nobody's going to tell you what happened.
Frustrating and scary. Ron, you want to tell us about your missing person story?
Actually, since we've already done a missing person, I probably want to talk about a fireworks incident.
Okay.
So a few years ago on opening night, they had a little short, brief fireworks show, and I'm sitting in my camp watching the fireworks show, sitting in a chair, relaxing, having a good time. And some campers are walking down the street, and they've got their own personal fireworks, little 2-inch mortar shell launchers. It's just a tube, and you drop a fireworks shell down there, and it launches out of the tube. Well, this guy is got the tube and he's shaking the thing, looking at the thing, and I'm thinking that can't be good. And he's fighting with it, and it's pretty obvious to me that he has a shell stuck in the mortar tube. So I'm sitting there just relaxing, thinking, okay, he'll figure it out. Of course, if it goes off while he's looking down the barrel, he's going to have an issue. Well, actually, the second worst thing happened. He's walking along, he's pointing it at the ground. The thing goes off. The mortar shell hits the ground, bounces back up, catches him square in the nuts, and the shell explodes. So he's lying on the ground screaming because he's just taken a direct hit right to the nutsack. And he's got first, second-degree burns. Now, I'm not a medical expert or anything. Thank God in my camp, I actually have emergency personnel. I have a nurse practitioner. I have an emergency room nurse inside the camp, and one of my campers came out and evaluated. Well, yeah, these are pretty bad burns. Not quite third-degree burns, but pretty bad. So the closest emergency services spot is Rampart, and I can't find anybody to get on a radio and get him evac. So we got to load him up into my rig and transport him over to ESD over to Rampart. Of course, I'm sitting there listening to his girlfriend who's walking along with him, and she's in the vehicle screaming. He's splayed out in the back of my rig. I've got the seats folded out, and she's apparently her fiance, and they had just, he had just proposed and they were going to get married. She's screaming at the top of her lungs, "Oh my God, if this affects your ability to have a father or a child, I'm going to kill you." He's just screaming like crazy. So I'm rolling down to Rampart, and thank God I had familiarized myself with the city. I'd done a little recon, knew where all the emergency stations were, and Rampart was the closest. Roll them down there, open up the rig, Folks from Rampart come out, unload them. I explain the situation. I don't have his emergency contact information because he's not in our camp. He's just some rando walking down the street with personal fireworks. But this emphasizes to me the importance of being aware of where all the emergency services physically are, not just seeing them on a map, but actually going out and doing your recon work and knowing where the facilities are and what's available. Because there may not be a ranger, there may not be a radio close by. You might end up having to transport somebody yourself.
Thank you for that entertaining story. Dave X, tell us your.
Those are my fireworks that are the Monday night fireworks. And that's why we don't allow people to have personal fireworks within camp, because we just can't make sure that everybody knows what they're doing there. And but your story is telling the one principle in this is don't look down the barrel of the fireworks. Don't, leave it. The fireworks say right on them, light fuse placed on ground, get away, right? That's the three things you need to know about fireworks, and you violated those rules. But what you were doing is you were storytelling around those rules. If you had just gone up and told somebody those rules, it would have been much less effective. In my work with the FAST team, I've realized over the years that our FAST inspectors, when they come up on somebody doing something that's a problematic, like let's say pouring gas out of a gas can straight into the burn barrel, they have to get out and stop and get in there and explain why not to do that thing. Tell a story like you did about the fireworks and the results of what happened, and then get back in and drive away. If I just drive up and say, hey, idiot, don't pour the gas right into the fire, you're going to kill yourself and everybody. If I find you do that, I'll have you arrested. And then I drive off in my golf cart. The first thing they're going to do when they leave is go to that activity, because I appear to be some uncool regulator imposing some arbitrary rule with no reason behind it onto them. So the most effective way to get any point about safety across is to get out and talk with people and storytell and tell the reason why this is a problem and the reasons going back. And then the best case result going forward after that is they then become missionaries of that same thing and will repeat your story of the guy with the fireworks in his ball sack or whatever happened with that. And then that story will live on and tell the story of that safety issue forever going forward, right? It's those things that stick in your mind more than some aggressive guy driving up and saying, don't do this or I'll have you arrested. So I encourage you to use the trick of storytelling wherever possible in your work around Burning Man safety, or really any topic at Burning Man, is just storytell. Take the time to tell why that is, the reasons, and how people avoided it and the results and all the things involved. Don't just roll up and issue an edict blindly, because nobody follows those.
Thank you. Yeah, emergency planning for Burning Man requires special consideration. What is it that's so different about life in Black Rock City that organizers need to know or ought to be focusing on? Dave.
I'm sorry, what? Did you ask a question there?
Yeah.
I missed the question. Repeat that. I was reading the notes.
Emergency planning for Burning Man requires special consideration. What's different about Black Rock City that all camp organizers should be focusing on or need to know? I know.
Well, I think, go ahead, Epiphany.
There didn't used to be Wi-Fi or phone service, and that also was a factor in not knowing where your campers might be, because even if you go to medical, you couldn't text someone or post about that. And that's changed somewhat now, but it still isn't completely reliable. What else have you noticed?
Well, I will tell you that a policy that we've implemented when there are emergencies is that you can go by places like the Artery and areas by the center camp, and we open up all the infrastructural internet and Wi-Fi abilities that we have, which are normally used just for the workings of Burning Man, but we immediately turn those on. So while you may not have been able to get Wi-Fi communication before, if you go to center camp, you can, and we increase the bandwidth so that folks could get out emergency messaging.
Thanks. Yeah, Mom.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, I think what makes it so different about dealing with emergencies on the playa is that we are a greater community. And so knowing not only what you have, but how to get what you don't have. We do have rangers, we do have a radio, I'm with DPW. I know what sort of resources DPW has, but not everybody knows those things. So what I don't have, someone else might. I might be able to go to Gary or Dave and say, hey, we have this problem. And I know you have worked through the solution before. So the thing about being at Burning Man, the thing about our community is that word, community. And so if you at least don't have that expertise or that knowledge, other people will have that for you. And so that's another reason to know your neighbors and to know those resources.
Yeah. Gary.
Oh, one thing I kind of recommend to anybody who wants to take theme camp organizer role is to do ranger training. Find out how the rangers work. It's the best way to figure out how rangers work is become a ranger. And I did it, and since then I've been much more confident dealing with rangers, obviously, and dealing with problems in general. A lot of people have worked with Zendo, and with the rangers dealing with green dot situations, and it's like you really can walk into a really uncomfortable situation with a bit more confidence just from that.
Yeah, I have to second that. And also I want to say I have been in awe of how well you can de-escalate a situation. The ranger training has had to help with that. I think one of the most powerful examples that I saw was at the Global Leadership Conference. Someone had wandered off the street onto the stage during a break and had started yelling into the microphone and saying things that didn't make sense. And I thought, oh, we're going to have a situation and security is going to come and they're going to cart him away. And a ranger walked on stage and put a hand out and said, tell me more about that. And they walked off together, and it was a beautiful thing. I don't know who it was, but I am definitely appreciative of that training. I have a question for all my speakers. Anyone, please, on the speaking team, please feel free to answer. Whose job is it, in your opinion, to do the emergency planning? And how does that fit in with radical self-reliance? I know in Buscamp, our membership is very individualistic because everyone comes with their own set of everything and we just happen to camp together. So there's not a lot of communal effort as far as that's concerned. And I think that's appropriate for that style of camp. But I'm interested to hear, Vesper.
Yeah. I am responsible for myself, because radical self-reliance. I also feel that I am responsible for the new burners that I am bringing to this environment. So I'm responsible for making sure that they are prepared ahead of time. And then I'm also responsible for the way that they comport themselves on playa, and they know me best. So if something comes up with them, I'm going to try to jump in to help if I can. As a theme camp organizer, I'm also responsible for the people who are in my camp. And as a citizen of Black Rock City, I'm responsible for all of you. So if I see you on the side of the road and you look like you're in trouble, I need to stop and see if I can help.
Nice. Thanks, Vesper. Fox. Oh, you're on mute, Fox.
Thank you. I actually liked how Vesper said that. I was going to say something very similar. On a base level, I am responsible for myself, but also as a camp lead, I'm responsible for everybody in my camp. But I also ask that everybody have a plan for themselves in our camp. So if something were to go wrong and they needed to leave, or they're sick, what would that look like? Do they have enough resources for like that and whatnot? And then we have a lot of core members that talk about emergency planning and being responsible for each other as well. And then as a citizen of Black Rock, same, I'm responsible for everybody else. We've had a person pass out in front of camp and gave them a Narcan, and they got up right afterwards like nothing had happened. But had we not had the resources, it could have been a very different story.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's clear that when you're a camp organizer or leading a camp, there's a feeling of protectiveness often that we have, but it's also important for individuals to watch out for themselves and remember where they are and try to make their best decisions. Mom, what are your thoughts?
Well, ultimately, I really do believe sort of the buck stops here, that I have the ultimate responsibility for everybody, but I don't like micromanaging. I hate being a micromanager. And when I've got 200 campers, I can't micromanage 200 people. So we do have a structure with, you know, people who we call the powers that be, and then it moves on down to our subcamp leads. And I think it also moves back up because we have subcamp leads who will call out. One I mentioned is actually watching us. She will come to me and say, listen, we've got this problem. We need to adjust and work with this. So I think the chain of responsibility goes down, but it also goes up. And I think that it really makes things move smoothly for us as far as who's ultimately responsible. Checks and balances.
Yeah, for sure. Molly.
I was gonna support what Mom said to a certain degree with a smaller camp story. So I think I started doing more leadership stuff in 22 and through the pandemic as well. But I think in 22 was an odd year, but I think the leadership took too much responsibility on ourselves as the leads to kind of be responsible for more than was appropriate and actually bearable. So this last year we created camp squads basically to take over certain responsibilities where there were leaders who kind of knew what we knew, and the things like a red folder, which we haven't used, but we had a folder of a similar type, or who knew what in camp and could organize. And then they shared that out to the squad. So it wasn't our responsibility as leads to have all the information all the time. And also to the point of like, you don't know who's going to be in camp. So you need someone in camp who has at least a pointer to, oh, it's this thing by the fridge, blah, 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 right, where things are. So I think we have the responsibility to gather the information, make it available, and then find ways to distribute it. Because a distributed network is much more resilient in times of stress than a single point of failure, right? And that's kind of what we have to focus on.
Thank you. Anyone else? Or thoughts on that? All right, we're going to move on. So we're going to talk now more about what we do on this team for emergency planning. Mom, you had some great advice. Yeah. You want to share that with us?
Did I? That's usually what moms have. It's just a matter of if anybody listens when mom talks. I see Vesper laughing. Thank you. You know, revisiting some of the things that really work for us, it kind of boils down to communication, no matter what those things are. Yes, it's very important to have these things in place. It's very important to know your resources, but it's very extra important to communicate that to people so those things can be activated when you need them. You know, some days I do not have a level head. And so my number 2 vulture chow will be like, okay, you need to chill. And someone else needs to make a decision here. And I think that it's also important. I mean, somebody mentioned self-care for leaders. Yes, it needs to happen. And that helps you maintain a clear voice. The other thing too is, interestingly enough, being prepared ahead of time and having documentation, spreadsheets, so that you know who you can go to, who are your experts, and you have that not only for yourself, but if you're absent, someone else can go to that list and use that, much like the red folder, which you have here that's come together. So I think that just kind of shined the light on some of those things that you had mentioned and we're looking for, is like the communication, knowing your resources and how to manage those things.
Thank you. Vesper, I know you guys have a giant village. What all is going on in there that you?
Yeah, we have so my small camp, which is about 7 to 12 people, is one of the camp within villages, RIP villages, of the alternative energy zone, which is about 400 people. And even among the larger village, we have cultivated this network, as Mom has talked about, of who has what strengths. Like, who's your secret welding guy or gal, or they? Who are the nurses? Who are the doctors? Who are the mental health professionals? And building some redundancy into that so that when nurse A, doctor A, and mental health professional A are all having a nice evening on an adventure, you are not relying on someone who might not be in a good place to be able to handle an emergency in that moment. Similarly, when we were preparing to bring my parents to Burning Man, who were in their late 70s when they attended, we wanted to make it as comfortable and fun for them, and also to make it a little bit easier for them to come out and still take care of their health. So we had them practice riding their bikes on dirt before they came to Black Rock City. We made sure that they had a timer or a watch so they could take their medication on time with extra medication just in case. We also have a very young person in our camp who started coming to Black Rock City when he was 3.5. And he is type 1 diabetic. So we need to make sure that we have the ability to keep his insulin cold and to check to make sure that he's going to be healthy. Whenever we go out on playa with him, we make sure that we have lots of different kinds of snacks and plenty of water, and know where we might be able to get help if we need it. Like Captain Ron said, where are emergency services? Like, not just kind of the zone, but like actually where are they and how do you get there? And that can also be really helpful when an acute issue arises. If you have someone, heaven forbid, trip on a piece of rebar and break their ankle, then who in the camp might be the best person to take charge in that situation, to keep a calm head and either radio or get someone to emergency services, and also knowing who maybe needs to take a step back in that moment. If you are too close to that situation or freaking out in the moment, you're actually not going to help. So being able to manage the dynamics in the moment, both to have someone take charge and also to know when someone needs to step back, can also help manage that moment of emergency really well.
Those are awesome points. Some things we don't always think about. I also liked your comment when we were preparing for this about sometimes emergency planning is in the opposite direction. Like,
yeah. This is something that I do partially because my parents are older now and have health issues, and I work in a field where crisis happens all the time in the default world. And so when I'm preparing to go to Playa, and I'm going for quite a long time, I go for pre-build to get ready. I go for build. I'm there for the event. I stay after for long strike and then post prep. And we're also traveling to and from Seattle. So I'm gone from Seattle for quite a long time for the burn. And so I am very clear with the people in my default life about where am I going to be? Where am I going to be traveling? Where am I expected to be every step of the way along that journey to Playa and from Playa, with contact information and locations and times if I know that. And I also share with them if something happens in the default world that is an actual emergency and you need to get a hold of me on the Playa, here's how to do that. There's really nice instructions in the survival guide about how someone in default can contact through the org to find you in the city if there's a serious emergency out in the default world. Because I don't have my phone on once I hit Playa. I like being able to disconnect. I will turn it on probably once, maybe twice during the time that I'm there, just in case a message has come through. But I like to be able to leave default world at Gate Road, and also want to take steps that in case something really dramatic did happen in the default world, that I could be reached if necessary. So being really communicative, telling people where I'm going and what to expect, and also that, you know, they can expect me to check out a little bit while I'm gone. So really, this is only if it's a serious emergency.
Nice, right on. Thank you. All right. So, Captain Ron, I have heard so many camp organizers say they use your resources when they're trying to teach their newbies about Burning Man and to be prepared. So I know you have to be getting a lot of hits. Tell us about your resources. I wanted to add this because I think, I mean, there are some good emergency planning resources in your collection, but also emergency planning is in the mundane preparation. If you don't have enough food or water or shelter, you might be faced with an emergency. So let's have Puppy share your share his screen with your site and tell us about that.
So many years ago, when I got placed for the first time, I found that it was really difficult to have a better quality burner. A lot of the acculturation process would involve reading board supplied documents. And my first burn was kind of tough. And I said, you know what, somebody's got to be able to write a more comprehensive guide, something that's a little bit of quicker read. I mean, all the information is available on all the Borg sites. Their survival guide is a beautiful piece of work, and the material and depth that they've researched is fantastic. The problem is that a lot of times the pages aren't updated. So I started writing an internal article series just to acculturate my burners. And I found that, you know, this might be a good idea to share this with other theme camps. And it evolved into the captain's log. So there are over now 40 different articles covering everything from sanitation, zero gray water kitchens, zero gray water shower systems, how much food to allocate, how long you could store it, how to have water on the playa without bringing in massive amounts of bottled water or external water. So you can find most of the articles here on our website. However, they're updated every year, so not all of these will be current for 2024. I go in and I update each one of the logs with current information, or there have been changes in technology or information or techniques that are better than the previous year. And I found that a lot of the bigger theme camps find it useful to help get their new burners up to speed. I find a lot of veteran camps burners are finding some of the techniques for like a zero gray water kitchen helps dramatically cut down on their disposal of gray water usage. More importantly, I guess my ultimate goal is I want to build better burners. I want to make it easier for people who are coming to the playa the first time. And I find that a better prepared burner is one that can handle minor emergencies. We spend a lot of time in our camp. We have a general camp orientation the first day where everybody's introduces themselves. But more importantly, we go through the location of emergency supplies and recap our emergency procedures. I'm fortunate that in my camp, I have people who actually do it for a living, people who are work for FEMA and actually have expertise in that area. And they'll do a 10-minute presentation and discuss and answer questions for everybody. But I think the most important thing is you need to prepare your burners. They need to be aware of what they're getting into. And if they're prepared, you're less likely to have an emergency spiral out of control. You're able to control the narrative.
Thank you, Ron. And thank you for continuing to do that. It's so valuable for the community. Kathy from Burners Without Borders is going to give us Burners Without Borders top tips and tricks or best advice for camp organizers.
All right. So I'm going to try not to repeat anything or too much of anything that's already been shared. And a lot of this is really built off of 2023, the mud burn, right? So we've been talking a lot about emergencies, some of them acute emergencies, certainly ones that we may expect in any burn, accidents. The 2023 presented something of a large-scale disaster response, just for a few days. But having been on disaster responses, this was very much a disaster response. And I think, given how the climate is, we may expect further large-scale events like this. So these tips are really going to be addressing some of those issues, things that you can do in camp to prepare in anticipation of some of these large-scale weather events or large-scale disaster events. Captain Rod said, control the narrative, 100%. So having camp meetings when there is some large-scale disruption, whether it's just a disruption in your camp, in your village, in your sector, or across Black Rock City. I know a lot of people don't like meetings. Death by meetings is a thing, but miscommunication and controlling the narrative is very important in a disaster situation. So having camp-wide meetings, I think, is really important. We have them at Burners Without Borders outside of disaster response situations. And so it was also really useful having a sense of normalcy and routine to kind of fall back on. It just so happened that the meetings had to deal with other things like rationing resources or dealing with mental health. In addition to having meetings, having a central notice board, whether it's a whiteboard, a bulletin board, something within camp that campers can go to if the situation is one that's rapidly evolving or devolving, depending on how you're looking at it. So having a place with updated information, even if the information is just, when are they burning the man this time? Are they burning it today? Are they burning it tomorrow? So a notice board can be really valuable for that. I think the radio, certainly the radio we had, the radio station there at BRC was tremendously valuable this last year around, and I think also helped to dispel misinformation and things that the rumor mill can generate. I was gifted early on in the burn a notepad. I don't know if it shows up because of the background there. A notepad, little simple notepad. Shout out to Toasty and Pappy. I don't know who these burners are, but they gifted this to me, and it became indispensable to me. I love walking around with a little field notes notepad anyway. I didn't happen to bring one with me to Burning Man, but this ended up being very useful during the rains, during the responses, when you needed to quickly jot down things. Whether those things are reminders to yourself to get a granola bar or to use the bathroom or drink water, or identifying needs. And speaking on that, Mom brought up a few times resources and needs, identifying them. One of the things that we did that I think was really helpful at Burners Without Borders and kind of fits in with mental health here is we gave people tasks. We gave people things to do, right? Keeping people busy when it's raining and it's cold and it's wet and the tents are destroyed. Keep people busy. Have them do something, whether it's picking up moop or something else. Whatever it is, it's going to be more valuable than them sitting around worrying or freaking out about what's happening. And one of the things that we did is we created two-person teams to go out of our camp and to assess. They were doing needs assessments, going around camp to camp. What do you need right now? Or what do you have excess of? And what ended up happening is that they were actually able to connect camps with one another, connect camps that needed something with a camp sometimes just next door that happened to have those resources, right? So I think that's really valuable to do, again, in a situation that's kind of large scale. In addition to that, try and keep things fun. And this was very difficult for me to kind of embrace because I do come from a disaster response world, and fun is just not, it's not in our vocabulary usually. It's like there's other priorities here. But I think the value of allowing Burning Man to be Burning Man, even when things are rough, even when it's raining, even when the plans have fallen through, was super valuable. So when the rains first started coming down, we had our front tent open, people coming in as we would normally have. And of course, as the rains continued, we noticed more and more people coming in. And then they were coming in cold and they were coming in wet, right? And they were coming in with needs that they had. And so we quickly had to address that as best as we could. So we started cooking up some leftover foods to feed them. We got the music going to get them dancing, to get them moving, to keep things warm, and also to improve mental health and keep spirits up. The mental health area, obviously, I'm a licensed therapist, so it's one of those areas that I tend to focus on most. And that's because any disaster or any emergency can easily be made worse by people not handling it well mentally and psychologically. Even though we're at Burning Man, where almost everyone there is prepared to endure difficulty and challenges, it's part of this communal experiment after all.
I know your
Sometimes
efforts
things happen.
helped me. Your efforts helped me when you guys showed up in camp, and I had been feeling anxious, and it just was reassuring to see you. So
Excellent.
we've
Yeah.
been a little short on time.
Mhm.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Just that we had Wi-Fi. We're probably going to still have Wi-Fi. Again, great for an emergency. Come on by.
Right on. Thank you for that. All right, Molly, your camp has 80 years of combined leadership experience. What are your top tips?
I mean, I think people really covered them all, but I do really resonate with what Chappie said around community and coming together in times of crisis and not relying on, not trying to go it alone in these situations, right? Like trying to figure it out. We did very similar things where we, during last year, came together, we cooked food together. We organized a fun thing with the neighboring camp because they ran out of something and we had plenty. And, it was like, we really tried to make it not a stressful situation. And it was still messy and horrible in its own way. But, I think we'll all remember last year for sure, but I don't really have much to add based on the other experts I heard.
Thank you. That's, I mean, in and of itself, that's good advice for life as well, in general. Dave, you had a few more things that I think might be really important for everyone to hear.
Yeah, we only got a few more minutes left. And just to reflect on the weather, though, I was way out by the DPW depot at the end of 5:30, almost near the graders. And for me, it was just another beautiful country day out there. It may have been disintegrating into chaos in the city, but I got up, drank my coffee. Birds were chirping back there. I was loving it out in rural Burning Man there. by the trash fence. So everybody's opinion of disaster is varying. One of the things I always point out in fire safety meetings that I have with all the artists who are burning their project is often people will develop very important and detailed safety plans for every contingency that may come up. And it's important that some people have that full book. But when you go into your office or workplace, who has one of those books in a little sleeve somewhere that says what to do in a case of emergency? A lot of us do have that little book, but have you ever gone to that book in an emergency?
Yes.
Never once. No, it's only for the people who wrote it. So I encourage you to have two levels really of the safety planning. For the key people in your camp, they get that book with every single possible emergency scenario in it. And for the people who have the bandwidth to digest all that, yes, they get the book. But for every rank and file camp member, maybe create a laminate, a swag laminate with your camp name on one side and 5 or 10 key points of emergency planning information on the back of your swag laminate that every person, no matter how much their commitment to emergencies, can pull out in an emergency and go, oh, here's this information they wrote on my laminate. Now it's coming into play. Because those folks are not going to go looking for that book with the emergency plan, sit down in a camp chair and flip through to the proper file division tab and read the plan for that emergency. It'll never happen. People either need to know it instinctually or it's like you didn't even write it. So key people who can take in that information, yes, but for your average campmate, keep it brief, keep it short. I should be able to come up and challenge anybody in your camp and say, what is your basic safety plan? And they should give me 3 or 4 lines of what the safety plan is rather than saying it's in the book, in the trailer over by the porta potties.
Right on. Great communication tip. Fox, we have a question or two, I think, for our speakers.
Yes, we have one question from Roman, and forgive me if I pronounce your last name incorrectly, Shmogolsky. He's asked, is there a contact for camp leads other than 911 to connect in case of a possible emergency?
Right, okay, so I mentioned this. You can't call 911 in Black Rock City. You can yell for a ranger and there will likely be one near enough to assist you. You can be a runner and go to any of the medical stations. Any ranger has a radio. There are resources for how to use a radio and how to initiate an emergency call in Black Rock City in the red folder. So as a camp, you might want to bring your own radio or even as a camper. Does anybody else have thoughts on that?
Excuse me, this is Roman. Can I clarify the question? It's not about the immediate emergency. It's something like we had last year when the water is coming and so on and so forth, and there is a rain. We probably need to coordinate the overall effort. Immediate emergency, I understand.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was a lesson learned is how we're going to get some better communication.
So let me comment on that because I've been in internal conversations and post debriefs about communications. The one commonality that almost everybody had access to was a radio. And that's why this morning they gave out the normal broadcast radio channel that emergency information will be broadcast on. Because even if you don't bring a radio in your gear, you're always near somebody's car that has a radio in it. So you were asking, the question was, how can camp leads get more information? Well, if you take the time to tune into those radio stations, you're going to be some of the most informed people on the playa and can pass that information on. There's no central clearinghouse that Burning Man infrastructure has for dispersing information to campmates other than those emergency radio broadcasting, which are really zeroing in on as our communication method to the entire city.
Thanks, Dave.
I was more about I was more about if there is a need for coordinated effort.
So real quick,
Whatever reason.
I have a direct answer to his question. The best way to get to know the leaders of camps, I think that's what your question was, is to begin to curate those connections. Go into your neighbors, introduce yourself, ask who is your lead, have conversations, walk over there with a little food or just a big hug. And that is the way to get to know the other people. There's also forums on Facebook. Reddit, that you can begin to connect with other leads, which I think was the exact part on your question. That's the best way to get to know other people. Get involved is the other great way. That's how I've gotten to know a lot of great people. And that's the best way to find out who your neighbors are, what resources they have, who you can rely upon. We have a sister camp. We know we can depend on them. I've got lots of friends with camps, and I think that might really answer the question that you're asking. No?
Thanks, Mom. We need to wrap up. So Fox is going to enter, as promised, that helpful resources doc with all the links from today. And I want to give a big thank you and shout out to all of our speakers and our team that worked really hard on this session. Please save the date for our next campfire talk, which will be April 15th. And everyone is welcome to unmute and say goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
You.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Great session. Thank you.
See you on Playa.